If you're here, there's probably something going on with your teen or young adult that doesn't feel quite right. Maybe things have changed. Maybe they're struggling. Maybe you've been asking yourself questions you don't quite have answers to yet. At some point, most parents find themselves in the same place. What do we do now? This is that conversation.
Welcome to What Do We Do Now from AMFM Healthcare. I'm your host, Robin Lovell. If you're a parent of a teen or young adult, you may have found yourself asking questions like, why does my child seem so stuck? Why does everything feel so overwhelming for them? And how do I support them without doing everything for them? Today, we're talking about something a lot of families are quietly struggling with, what's often referred to as failure to launch. Maybe your child is avoiding responsibility, struggling to move forward, or shutting down when life gets uncomfortable. Maybe you found yourself constantly stepping in to smooth things over, remove obstacles, or keep things from falling apart. And while all of that often comes from a place of love, at some point many parents start to wonder, am I helping them grow or accidentally making it harder for them to move forward? Today's conversation is really about that tension. I'm joined by Aja Chavez, Vice President of Adolescent Services at AMFM Healthcare, and a licensed therapist who works closely with teens, young adults, and families navigating these challenges every day. And Dr. Chris Hoff, a narrative therapist, educator, and founder of the California Family Institute. Chris's work focuses on helping people navigate change, uncertainty, and identity, and translating complex psychological ideas into practical ways families can better understand themselves and each other. Chris and Aja, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Robin.
Chris, I'd love to start broadly and ask, when you think about the young adults and the families you're seeing in your practice right now, what feels different about this generation, their relationship with independence, responsibility, growing up?
Great question. I think it's easy for somebody maybe at my age. I think it's kind of traditional that we critique the younger generations as they're coming up for certain things. But I think particularly this generation is being met with particular challenges that I don't think any of us have had to meet. That the developmental map that once stood, you graduate school, you go out and get a job, you find a partner, you move to independence. That map that once used to carry us all is kind of breaking down, and the world is now quite precarious, and economically, and even the school path now is being called into question with AI and all of that, and so I think this younger generation, although many might call them weaker, actually I think they're just more honest about what's happening, that the map that once was is dissolving, and they're kind of honest about that, and it hasn't been replaced with anything. And what I think gets called failure to launch is just kind of a frozen place. It's kind of a waiting that many of these young people are at a threshold. They know they're at a threshold. They just don't know how to step in to what's next.
That's interesting. I think it'd be helpful for the listener for us to describe what failure to launch is. And I would love for both of you to answer that question. And to kind of touch on, I think what you mentioned, Chris, is really these young adults bumping up against what feels like their capacity and maybe needing support in developing more capacity or more tolerance for some of the difficulty. So lots of questions in there, but maybe we can tackle what failure to launch is and then kind of talk about how we help our kids to develop capacity.
Sure. Yeah, I can jump in on that. I think I just want to pause and say how cool this is to be having this conversation with Chris. Chris was my practicum supervisor and mentor, and so much of the identity formation of myself as a clinician came from sitting in spaces with Chris, getting to observe how he worked with clients and just like this lens of the world that I think is like we're so desperate for it right now. And so I'm really grateful to be sitting in this conversation. I'm really honored. And yeah, it's really cool. It's really cool because like I felt like I was this new like budding baby in my 30s. I felt like this new budding baby human clinician not knowing what I wanted to do in the world. And Chris was really formative and like helping me launch and figure out how to navigate all of that. Okay, going back to the question, failure to launch and what that looks like. In our original conversations around this, I talked about the movie Failure to Launch. Remember the movie with Matthew McConaughey? And oh, what a good cast. It made it look kind of fun and like a little sexy because like everything Matthew McConaughey is and is sexy. But it made it seem like it was this, adult male living in their parents' basement, um, not no job, not being able to financially support themselves and I think like even when I hear the phrase failure to launch, that's the picture that I get. I think of an 18 to 40 something year old male who's like, "Ma, get me my whatever." And I think that we've got that a little bit wrong, and I think that that's a little um, putting this idea into a bit of a box. I see failure to launch in these like adolescent stages all the way through young adulthood, all genders. I don't think it matters what gender. And I think it really is what Chris said of this like frozen, I don't know what I want to do. If I do know what I want to do, I don't know how to get there. This inability to navigate the world. And many times it doesn't come from a lack of intelligence. It doesn't really maybe even come from a lack of motivation. I think it truly comes from this place of I don't know how do I do it? Someone please give me the like roadmap or the tools or the whatever to figure this out.
Yeah, I think, just to say in narrative therapy, we might say I'm trying to, limit my use of using the term failure launch because it kinda speaks to somebody that didn't ignite properly or something, and I don't think that's capturing it. I think, people I think people want better in their lives, but they're losing the ability to imagine futures right now, and the old maps have gone away, and the new maps aren't here yet. And so I think that's a lot of our work in the helping professions is how do we help people imagine futures again? How do we help people map again? How do we provide the scaffolding that has gone away and re-provide it again to folks of all ages that are stuck at some particular threshold, right?
I think there's a question in here that would be helpful for our parents that are listeners is really to identify uh, what are some things that we might be looking for if we're worried that our son, daughter, whether they're teenager or older, is experiencing some of this, for lack of better words, stuckness.
Mhm.
What can we look for?
Well, that's a great question. I think it becomes apparent that, people are having a hard time moving in direction. So, maybe how do we help them do that? Or what are we looking for? And
Yeah, I mean, does it show up in inability to complete like homework? Is it showing up in inability to show up at work? Maybe they have a job, or is it, we see them shutting down in relationships. And I guess there's a question in there too of like, at what point is this troublesome? At what point are we worried about some of the things that present as probably normal, typical things, but we see them unable to push past and actually execute some of the responsibilities?
yeah, I think it should raise, it should get your attention if you see that happening at any age, and then be curious about what's happening for the person. Um, yeah, if simple tasks aren't getting done, then yeah, that would raise concerns, and then I would want to be very curious about what's happening for the person. Yeah.
We see it often in mission prep, but I would say even in my private practice working with teens and young adults, I think parents would look at it and their interpretation or their verbiage around it would be, my kid's giving up. They give up on everything. They're lazy. They're, it's like this like stopping and not knowing how to start again, I think is a lot of what some of those initial behaviors that then build off of each other that create the frozen, like not being able to function in their world. And with teens, even like young kids, I told my son I wasn't going to share any more stories about him. That's not true. I'm going to share stories about my kids probably in every single one of these. It's totally fine. Although I shared a story about my son last one and my daughter watched it and she was like, what about me? So I'll try to think of something just for Alana in this one. But it's okay, I'll share a story about Alana, which could just be a normal developmental phase and her having an opinion and her having a stance on something, or it could be, the beginning of this idea of like, I don't like discomfort. I'm not going to do that. We signed her up for dance. She wanted to dance. I think she really just wanted to wear the cute tutu. And like, you don't wear a tutu a lot in dance class. It's like pretty uncomfortable, like you're stretching your body, you're building muscles, you're being told quite often, like, that's not the right way to do it. This is the right way to do it. She wanted to just go out and like, la da 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 da. And so after a couple of weeks, she was like, this isn't fun. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm just not going to go. And as a parent who read the book Grit, so I had she shares this story about her daughter wanting to give up on ballet. I was at this crossroad of, do I honor my child's desire to not do something, right? Like, do I step in and protect her from the discomfort? She really she's being criticized in this class, and she's pushing her body in a way that doesn't feel comfortable for her. So do I step in? Do I remove the discomfort? Do I allow her to quit, to stop? Or do I say, this is something that you requested. We signed up for 12 classes. You're 4 classes in. You got to finish the classes. And for me, it was, you got to finish the classes. And I'll tell you what, you want to know who paid the price for that? Me. Because I had to deal with the crying and the tantrums and I don't want to put the thing on and get in the car and we're late. And it was a lot of work to show up as a parent who was like, if you're going to experience the discomfort, which then means I'm also going to be in the discomfort of it. Now, after 12 classes, she quit. Guess what she's asking to do again? Dance class. We're going to pause on that. But I think it's with a lot of our clients and teens, what it's showing up as, I was like, I don't want to do that. I'm not going to do that. And parents coming in and saying like, okay, sweetie, you don't have to do that. Which as a parent, that's our natural inclination to be like, okay, I got you. I'll take this discomfort or the challenge away for you. And it's that we call it the snowplow parenting, taking away the barriers, the roadblocks, the challenges. Yeah, that was a very long story. I tend to tell very long stories.
And can I say something about, because you reminded me, Aja, about oftentimes I'll sit with young people, and they get characterized as like Aja said, as quitting or giving up or being a slacker, was a term. And what I've come to realize in my work over the years is that actually, often the person that appears to be, because we have this common type A personality, the go-getter, gets it all done, doing all that stuff. And they get accused of being in a relationship with perfection. But I think with these people that get characterized as slackers or whatever, that can't get started on anything, I think they have a stronger relationship with perfection. And in a lot of cases, people that get characterized as quitting or giving up are actually in a strong relationship with perfection, and they need to have a guaranteed outcome of how this thing's going to look, or there's a fear of failure or something like that. And I feel like if you're not paying attention to these kinds of things, it can appear very differently than what's really happening to the person at that time. And I think Asia said something really important in her own experience that, I think we're talking about how do we re-engage rites of passage for young people or even anybody that's at a threshold, right? And for parents, I think there's a parallel rite of passage, right? That Asia spoke to, that, you have to move, parents are going to have to move from like caretaker to consultant or manager to witness or rescuer, like Asia was talking about, to boundary holder, right? And so even when we're asking young people to make these transitions, I hate to break it to the parents that there's a transition involved, and there's transitions involved with them as well, and that boundaries are not rejection; they're the scaffolding that's going to hold this work together. So
I'm curious, and I think this is important for our parents and the listeners, talking about why discomfort is such an important part of development, and a parent's natural inclination to remove that discomfort is very real. And also, we rob them of the ability to learn and to develop that capacity further. So I kind of want to talk about that and why it's so important for development.
I think just not just young people or parent. I think everybody nowadays has to expand their window of tolerance for discomfort, because that's the world we're living in now, right? And I love the poet John Keats, where he coined the term negative capability, right? I've been playing around with that idea that this is this capacity to remain in uncertainty, ambiguity, discomfort, and that is the skill set needed to do these sorts of journeys, to move from thresholds into liminal space, and to also parent now. Parenting is a practice of, a negative capability. And the question I'd want to ask parents too is like, whose discomfort are you actually solving here, right? And so, I posted something on my Substack recently that I think, that a lot of work around young people today is actually work for the parents, that parents need to expand. If we're going to escape the helicopter or snowplow parenting dilemma, right, parents are going to need to expand their window of tolerance for discomfort. And they're going to have to ask themselves some hard questions about whose discomfort am I really solving here? And what is being lost in me taking away some of these challenges, some of this friction from people's lives? What is being lost in this? Yeah.
So if parents are listening and they're checking off the yes, I do that, it's instinctual, and they're, feeling like, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying. What happens when a young adult never really learns to tolerate that frustration or experience failure or that piece of accountability? What happens to those, if we can talk about that for the parent that is listening, so that we can reinforce why developing this negative capability is so crucial?
Well, first of all, everything Chris said, I feel attacked. I feel seen. And I love this idea of friction. Let's not forget, because I really want to go back to that. I loved in a previous conversation what we shared about that. And one more thought before kind of diving into this. Chris, you posted, I don't know if it was on your Substack or LinkedIn, but you created a post around snowplow parenting. I'd be so curious to hear any responses that you got, if there was dialogue around it and what some of that maybe was, because I feel like sometimes I live very much in this bubble of working with families who it's like they've hit the point of, oh goodness, we're in struggle. This is a problem. And so, yeah, I would just be curious to hear any of the dialogue that came up around that, and then that friction piece. And so, Robin, your question, if I remember it from 30 seconds ago, was what does it look like when we have removed some of the barriers and challenges?
Yeah, what does it look like when we have a young adult that never developed that negative capability or developed more capacity for tolerating frustration or failure or accountability? What does that look like?
It looks like, and it's going to look different for everybody, but how I observe it is someone who has almost lost all confidence in themselves, in their belief in their ability to handle stuff. And then it's almost this blaming of others. I see blame shows up, and then I see this irritability and frustration that either is outward facing in the behaviors, which might look like a 17-year-old throwing a bit of a tantrum, however that might be. Or it can be very internalized and very kind of self-deprecating, or like, I'm never going to be able to handle this. And so I'm thinking of clients that, and this is coming from a place of love, and also someone who I myself was an adult and I went to treatment, and there were times where and my parents did not snowplow parent. I am an elder millennial. They were like, good luck, kid. We love you. We're going to give you this little toolbox. Love my parents. They were wonderful, and certainly did not helicopter or snowplow. But I see these clients that come in and they don't know what to choose for breakfast, and they've never made their bed before. And they might be 17 going on 18 and have no idea how to do laundry. And we're doing academics with them, and they were like, this test is really hard. I'm just not going to do it. I'm going to play a video game instead. And so it's showing up in these what are seemingly small, inconsequential behaviors, but compounded. It's someone who doesn't know how to life, and then is really mad at everybody else because they don't know how to life.
And I would add to that, Robin, that I think parents have to understand there's always a message embedded in the message, that there's something implicit in when you remove friction from your child. There's an implicit message in that I don't believe you can do it, right? And I think some of those things get internalized. And so I've sat with a lot of 40-year-old clients that are contending with that message, that they can't do it, and that was acquired at a younger age, right?
That stings a little. As a mom, I have no, it's okay. I have a 3-year-old son, and I'm just thinking about for me right now, the biggest challenge is he wants to put his shoes on himself and his socks on himself. And I'm trying to let him, and I don't want to send the message that you can't put your shoes and socks on. But that's a very small scale. I think my next question would be, what's the difference between supporting your child and over-accommodating them? Because that's a fine line sometimes, and I think that would be great for the listener to understand, because we want to support, and we also don't want to send those messages that I don't believe you're capable.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm not saying, launch young people into full autonomy, right? Or that. I think
that sounds dangerous.
Right. So, yeah, I'm saying that, that, and that's a question for every parent's relational knowing of their child is the way that I would describe it, right? But if you're, it's just kind of, it has to, there's a mindfulness to it, right? You have to be, am I removing my discomfort? What message am I sending here? Am I unwilling to hold this boundary or scaffolding in the effort, right? Um, I think it just comes down to the parents' really relational knowing about their own child and what the child needs. And it doesn't mean separating from the child. I think I don't want to get into that individualistic thing. I think we all need witnesses in our lives. We need community. We need this communal thing. And I think journeys that we're confronting now, young people are confronting now, um, are like you can't be done alone. They need to have people in the mix, and that means it could mean therapists, it could mean mentors, coaches, whatever it is. That all that stuff is going to be helpful. Yeah.
Chris, you had like a few I don't know, segments or discussion points earlier. We were talking about parents, right? And whose discomfort are you trying to alleviate? Um, that was like a slow burn that's still kind of showing up for me. And I see that I'm thinking about like, I'm my kids are 9 and they're 6, and I have friends who have younger parents, and you're talking about this like expanding the window of tolerance that parents have for the discomfort. And my initial thought was like, man, we're so tired though. Like we're so tired, and we're like, I think that the parents of teens and young ones right now, we're starting to have that shift. Instagram tells me anyway that we're starting to have that shift, that we're that generation that's no, I'm just kidding. I see it as a clinician too. But we're we you also mentioned like this generation, they might just not be willing to tolerate some of the BS that maybe we put up with. And they might be taking a stance against that. And we might be interpreting that as failure to some negative, right? We put these negative frameworks around that. Um, but I see this like generation of parents that, oh, what did I just saw? I just saw a phrase for it. It was like beta parenting. Is that where it's like we had the helicopter parents, we had the snowplow parents, and now we have this generation of parents who are a little bit more hands off? And I think, Robin, what you were talking about of like that difference between supporting our kids versus, what was it, accommodating them? What was the two? Okay, yeah. Um and so I can see like in the friends that I'm surrounding myself with, and that there's this like, we're okay with our kids failing a little bit, and I think we're starting to get a little bit more comfortable with our own like stance in the world of like, our kids failing isn't necessarily like a statement of who we are as people, right? Or as parents, that letting our kids, and when I say fail, that's just such a general phrase, that's really broad. I don't mean like completely face planting in the world, but like these, like struggle, friction, all of these different challenges that I think that like the generation right before me, or maybe a little bit of my generation, if our kids failed, it was like, we have somehow failed and we're doing something wrong. Like, look at all the parents that all the things that they did to get their kids into these Ivy League schools, and that I think so much of that is them wanting to be seen in a certain light, not so much around their kids' like growth and capability in the world.
Robin, yeah, can I add to that, Robin,
Yeah, of
too?
course.
I train a lot of therapists. I have over the years. So one of the things I tell therapists, because oftentimes therapists, a common mistake for therapists is to get out in front of their clients, right, and start doing that same thing, getting out in front of their clients and clearing the way for them and all that kind of stuff. And what I often tell them is that it's your job to stand behind, look over their shoulder, and ask them what they see. And I would say the same thing for parenting. And to your question, how do I know, and it's being a cognizant of when you're getting out in front of your child and trying to clear the way for them, and to try to remember to stand next to them and look over their shoulder and ask them what they see. And I think that is a piece of wisdom to do that. And I also want to say that going back to, I don't think this is a weaker generation. This generation is deficient, or parenting even today is deficient. I think both young people and parents in our world right now are uniquely unsupported than they probably have ever been. Our communities, our third spaces, they're all dissolving. We have a digital loneliness that simulates, connectedness. And I think it's really hard to be a parent today. I think it's hard to be a young person today. And I just think that, they're uniquely unsupported.
I'd agree with that. And I think from my own experience I didn't have my son until I was 37. So I'm also in the generation where I have aging or ill parents and also a young child at the same time. So I'm kind of straddling both sides of, what my adulthood looks like. And I'm caring for two different generations of family members. I was thinking while you guys were talking about allowing our children to fail or develop their own capacity and that idea of standing behind and watching. And my son goes to a Montessori, and I oftentimes will show up early because I pick him up midday. It's snack time, and I get to watch him interact with the other children. And I watched him the other day completely unpack his lunch, open up all of his snacks, eat his fruit, do all these different things, clean up all of his mess, take it to the trash can, put his water bottle in his lunchbox, zip it back up, and get ready to line up. And all things that I would normally do for him at home, open his snack, do all these things. I'm starting to
Yeah.
incorporate more of this at home of, can you throw this away? Can you get mom a snack? Can you, and I fight my own, it'll be faster if I do it. It'll be less messy if I do it. And just kind of stepping out of my own way of that and allowing him to have these experiences and really it's skill development. And if I'm not giving him these opportunities and getting out of his way, I'm getting in the way of growth.
Yeah, when you were sharing the story about putting on the shoes, right? I have degrees in early childhood education. Did not as a parent, didn't necessarily serve me. But I remember learning, you let the kid put the shoes on the wrong feet. They do it themselves. And they're gonna put their shoes on the wrong feet. And they're gonna be uncomfortable. And at some point, they are probably gonna look down and say, oops, I put my shoes on the wrong feet, and switch the shoes around. And that is building that capacity and their ability to scan their environments and to make choices, agency, to be able to navigate the world around them and make these choices and figure it out and deal with the outcomes of those choices and whatever that is. And I can so relate to it's just quicker and easier. It's just, there's and in our initial conversation earlier, I think a question that I had for you, Chris, was what develops more growth? Is it friction or is it ease? Is it providing friction or is it providing ease for our kiddos? Because I think what we've seen a lot is the providing ease, which is the helicoptering and the snow plowing. And how do we get back if it's friction?
Yeah, and I think, kind of what I was talking about then is a lot of this parenting now is react. I'm Gen X, right? So a lot of, we were absolutely feral. We were latchkey kids. I had a shoestring with my house key tied around my neck. There was be home by the time the street lights are on kind of thing, and so. And I think a lot of us and, like elder millennials and such, kind of swung all the other way around. And, there's a middle way in there somewhere for all of us, right? And I think friction, and because of, this recent trend of friction maxing by Gen Z, I think it was really interesting to me because I think, they realize, even they know the benefit of friction, right? Like that it's never fun. It's always uncomfortable, consequences aren't fun. They're uncomfortable. But I mean, how do we learn? If you have a friction-free life without consequences in it, what do you think you're going to get, right? It's going to be a lot of trouble. I read something recently where this young person was in a job and he got not reprimanded, but just corrected. Like, can you do this differently, whatever? And he walked off the job because it was the first time that somebody was actually critical of him at a time. And it was read in a very negative way. And so I think we need a little more friction in our lives. And I appreciate the young people being creative about that and knowing that they didn't get it, so they're going to create. A lot of people are going to flip phones now to get out of the social media loop, and so people are being creative out there.
I wanted to ask, for the parent that's listening, can we identify some practical ways that we could start introducing a little bit more accountability or responsibility at home? Like if you find yourself, you're listening to this conversation and you're, raising your hand at certain parts relating to removing barriers, removing obstacles, softening the landing for consequences for your kids. Let's give some practical tools or ways that we can start to introduce some of that to maybe have a little corrective action. And I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and she has a 13-year-old son, and she's really working with him on him doing his own laundry. And she's now decided to stop doing his laundry. And the very hard part for her is that he will wear and rewear, and he's smelly right now. And this is the natural consequence. And she's trying to solve or avoid solving for her own discomfort of, I now have the stinky kid. And this is just kind of a humorous example and also a very real, tangible example of this is the consequence. You're going to go to school and your friends are going to call you stinky if you are not cleaning and washing your clothes and bathing.
Yeah, and you have to trust that social technology, right? That, like, yes, it is uncomfortable for you. But then the young person will learn that his friends don't like him stinky. And then the corrective action, it has to probably come from outside of the family anyway, right?
Well, and
But back to your question.
yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that social construct that helps to inform us of when we're doing or not doing something correctly. Our friends will let us know oftentimes, especially if you're a teen something.
Parents have to trust in that. That's one of those things where peer pressure is probably your friend, maybe. But back to your question about real things. I would want parents to know that there's a transition that they need to make that I kind of spoke to earlier, that parents are also crossing a threshold and there's work for them to do. It's not just dropping your kid off to therapy and hoping they fix them. There's absolutely, as a director of a community counseling center, that happens quite a bit. But there's work for the parents to do too, and that is expand your window of tolerance, expand your negative capability, that your role eventually is going to move from caretaker to consultant, that you're going to move from manager to witness. That means standing behind them, looking over their shoulder and asking them what they see, and that probably primarily moving from rescuer to boundary holder. And then provide that scaffolding and that structure that the young person needs. But I'm a big fan of collaborative agreements, that people sitting down together and making the invisible visible, right? What are the roles? What is everybody going to be doing? And then, setting boundaries around that kind of stuff. So, and then there's, I have rites of passage stuff, that are kind of going away. How do we recognize where the young person is at? How do we acknowledge steps that they've taken? How do we support their identity migration, whatever that might be? How do we acknowledge where they've come from to where they're going? Being with them on that journey into the unknown, uncertain, and ambiguous.
Can I expand on that just a tad?
Yeah. And then I have a follow-up question that's just right on the tip of my tongue.
Chris, every time you talk, I find myself not as chatty in this conversation because I am just absorbing everything that you're saying as a clinician, someone who works with teens. And I get these questions from parents all the time of like, well, what do I do? And I love this idea of shifting from manager to witness. And so what that might look like, I'm thinking of, I'm going to speak specifically to parents of teens because that's my world right now. This co-creating of the community or the environment that you live in of like, okay, we all have responsibilities here. Whether that you might call that chores in our household, we call them chores. But it's all like, okay, what are the things that need to get done in this house for this house to like function, for it to be clean, for us to have the food in our bellies and our clothes to be clean, and for us to be able to get to all the things that we want to do and to have the fun. We all have different things that we need to be responsible for in this house. And so coming up with a list of, okay, what does that look like? Like, what are the different roles? What are we all going to do in this house? The agreements that we're going to make for teens. Create that list, put it on the fridge or put it on, some people, I need a checklist. I need to know every day. Growing up, like we had certain chores on certain days. Tuesdays and Thursdays, I had to Lysol the bathroom. Turns out I'm allergic to Lysol. And so I would and it was like the foaming one, which was actually really fun to use. So I would like foam up the entire bathroom sink. It was so fun. I was like 14 years old and I felt like a kid. I got to play in there again. I'm not sure how much of the bathroom got cleaned. And then I would spend the entire next day sneezing. But knowing that like every day you have these responsibilities for some families, you're going to motivate your teen with maybe they get an allowance or maybe they get some sort of privilege or we live in a society where a lot of our actions are rewarded with either financial or a privilege or something. And so that might be building in like, for younger, maybe like preteens, it might be like, okay, you do your homework every day for this week. You get an extra 30 minutes of Roblox or Fortnite or whatever. My son's really into the skate park right now. And so we build in like, okay, you finish all of, and you have to, it can't just be you finish your homework. You have to do it without one mom or dad like having a breakdown. It's always mom. Dad's very calm. Like, will you do it? Just do your homework. And then he's like, can you help me with the math? And I'm like, I'm out. Third grade math, out. I can do all the other stuff. But it's creating these and like us getting really clear on it. Now, here's the challenging part for me as a parent, and maybe other parents can relate to this, the follow through. It's the follow through on the accountability, being the accountability partner in that. That's, I think, where so much of that partnership comes in, is when the whining and the crying and the like, okay, you chose not to do the stuff, so you don't get the reward, and then having to tolerate the like, but mom, everyone's going to the skate, they're all at the skate park, and having to say like, sorry, man, remember Tuesday and Thursday you chose not to do your homework? So some of the outcome is like, you also have to deal with your parent. No, I'm not sending an email to your teacher. I'm not lying and signing off on your assignment book, which means then I get the email from the teacher saying, which for me, I'm not going to lie, I experience shame around that. Every time I get that email from the teacher saying like, it's really important, your son's in 3rd grade, he's going into 4th grade, it's his responsibility. I feel like that email to me is, it's your responsibility to make sure he does this. And me responding back and saying he chose not to do his homework. We trust that the consequences that he gets in your class are going to be appropriate. He's going to have to learn how to navigate that. And so I think like for parents, like building those out, getting really clear with yourself on, okay, how am I going to build my tolerance, my window of tolerance when they don't do the things, and then really celebrating when they do.
That leads me to one of the questions that I wanted to ask earlier and was on the tip of my tongue. What should parents expect to see emotionally from their children when we start building this scaffolding or these boundaries, we start implementing these things? We're going to see pushback. We're going to see big behavior, or we're going to see frustration, discomfort, etc. Like that stuff will show up. So first part of the question is, what should we expect emotionally when our kids are showing up in this way to see in our kids and also probably to experience in ourselves? And how can we stay grounded as parents when we're experiencing this pushback? Because really they're looking at us, expecting us to behave in some kind of way or to fold.
Yeah. Well, as a family therapist and, kind of grounded in systems theory, I think any real change, second order change, third order change, whatever it is, isn't going to happen without that sort of pull to bring it back to homeostasis, meaning the pull to bring it back to the way it was before, right? And so there will be a rise of pressure and disruption and a bunch of uncomfortable discomfort, right? And so, but you have to trust that once you move into some sort of change, that will subside, right? But the more you give in to that sort of pressure, you will never get to that second order, third order change,
Right.
right?
You prolong getting to the other side of that piece because you keep short circuiting the process.
Exactly, and so to answer your question is to hold tight. My response would be, hold tight, find your people, don't do it alone. Often I tell, Aja probably had to hear me say this 100 times, that I don't care what the problem is, it grows in isolation. So as parents too, I think, Aja talked about the parents, it's just shame that parents often feel that will isolate them. And I think, how do you connect with other parents that are trying to do these same things? How do you connect with people that care for you in the way you need to be cared for? Those sorts of things. So.
I think, unfortunately, for the parent that's listening, the answer is that this is often harder for us than it is for our kids. Our kids are really resilient, and if we keep the conditions right, they'll get there faster than we will.
It's true. Good point.
Sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, mom and dad.
Yeah.
Yes. And like, I think that it's like that short-term pain for the long-term gain. Is this going to suck in the moment? Like, Robin, some of the behaviors that I see it ranging from the throwing the controller, throwing the gaming controller, or getting even like a little handsy and aggressive with like trying to get their cell phone back, or like screaming and yelling, "I hate you," and all of the like cursing out, and it might go all the way over to the pendulum of like, if you don't let me do this, I'm going to kill myself. Like it can become that intense, right? And it's not always from this like attention seeking. It's really like the flooding that a teen or a young one will feel around the like discomfort. It gets that intense for them. And so the behaviors are kind of all over the place. And so I just want to also say that if you're seeing some of these larger behaviors, that's a really, really, really crucial time to seek guidance and to seek support. Your friend group might not have the tools in their toolbox to support you in the way that you need to be supported. This might be a really good time to reach out to a school counselor or to start to seek therapeutic services in your area, because many times it doesn't kind of like self-correct. And we can kind of get lost in like you were both talking about in this like cycle of starting and stopping, which I think many times actually can exacerbate a situation and kind of sometimes make things a little bit worse.
That's a perfect segue into one of the other questions that I had. And I'm glad that you brought up or described the opposite ends of the pendulum. You could just have school refusal. You could just have, tantrum-like behavior. And the other end of the spectrum is really loud, big, I'm going to kill myself if you don't give me this. And that feels really scary in that moment when you hear that from your kid and you don't know genuinely if they're being serious or not, or what action they might take, or if they have any kind of history of self-harm. Are they self-harming? So for the parents who are listening that feel exhausted, feel hopeless, feel like it's already too late, and they're already in that place where it's really big and really messy. You've already identified seeking services. You've talked about getting some support. What else can we be doing?
Well, getting the services for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't. In some ways, it's an impossible task if you're trying to do some of this stuff on your own. And somehow I would encourage parents not to see their child as the problem, but to see the problem as the problem, and that, young people that maybe go to more drastic lengths have less of an ability to tolerate discomfort. And that's not it's not a bad thing. It's just something that's where the work is, right? And so but that's sometimes an impossible a task to do on your own. So seek help, seek services. There's all kinds out there, to help you through this process and help your young person through this process too.
We've covered a lot of ground in this episode, and I'm really grateful. I think this was really candid conversation, and we went in a lot of different directions. I think there's some really strong takeaways for parents.
Yeah, I was going to say, to parents, I mean, there's real things we can't psychologize away, right? Like housing costs and economic precarity and the erosion of community. And like I said, digital loneliness that's masquerading as something else. Those things are real, and a lot of that stuff is out of your control. But in the face of those things, there's always personal agency to be found for you and for your young person and for your family, right? And, one of my favorite therapy questions is some version of this, as I'm going to share it, is in the face of these things that seem insurmountable at the time, who do you want to be? What do you want to do? Right. And those are the questions that I think point towards personal agency, even though it all sometimes feels really impossible. There's still places of personal agency, like who you might be in this moment, what you might do in this moment, and try to hold on to that there's always, even though it might seem impossible, there's always avenues to go.
Yeah, I love that. I think that had me thinking of like these clients, these young people that maybe are in this position that we might say is like the failure to launch. Like maybe they're like living in that. That doesn't mean that they don't have big dreams and goals. And that doesn't mean that they don't have these like incredible gifts and it's just going to kind of take what it's going to take, and it might take some creativity and kind of finding our way into partnering with them to get those to start to surface. And so it's like this reminder of we're never at a place of hopelessness. Never. No matter what it looks like, no matter what it might feel like, we're never there. Even if they say they're there.
I think that's really important for parents to hold on to that and to keep that hope alive when you're feeling this frustration, and to just stay the course and hold your mud. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So before we wrap up, we end every episode with a short segment called Field Notes, and it's where I ask each of you to step back and share one thing that you're seeing in your work that you wish more parents understood. So, Chris, I'll start with you. From what you're seeing every day, what's one thing you wish more parents understood?
I wish more parents understood that it's not a motivation problem, it's a story problem. And, I am a narrative therapist, so it's, and going what Aja just said, that, it's not a motivation problem, it's a story problem. What stories do they have access to, and what stories are getting shut down? And so it's never hopeless. Like Aja said, there's always other stories that are accessible, but just sometimes it seems like the problem story is the only one. But we are multi-storied creatures. We have access to all kinds of stories, and it's not a motivation problem. It's just a story problem.
Be careful the story you're telling yourself about yourself.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Aja, I'll ask the same to you. What are you seeing that you wish more parents understood?
Many times the pause is a recalibration of getting on their own path, not the path of the shoulds. And so many times this uncertainty, the being in the liminal space is the preparation for the path and the journey that they're truly meant to be on. And then secondarily, a reminder to parents that the kids are okay. Like, they're in deep struggle and it's really messy right now. And I have so much excitement and hope with this generation because they are willing to dive into discomfort in a way that maybe we weren't even willing to dive into it. And a reminder to that failure and challenges and all of the messiness of life is really what's going to allow our young people to have the confidence and the ability to navigate through their world. Let them have that. Don't take that away from them. It's going to be their greatest gift.
Thanks so much to Aja and Dr. Chris Hoff for helping us unpack a topic that so many families are struggling with right now: how to support young adults without unintentionally removing the very experiences that help them grow. If you're listening and recognizing some of these patterns in your own family, hopefully this conversation gave you a different way to think about what might be happening and where the growth can begin. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with another parent who might need to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. I'm Robin Lovell. Thanks for listening to What Do We Do Now?